Welcome to Garden Delights. I'm Susan Howington, Family Consumer Science Agent with the Henry County Cooperative Extension, partnership with the University of Georgia. Today we're going to talk about kale, and we're going to make mushrooms with kale. And we're also here from Frank Hancock, our Agriculture and Natural Resource Agent, and he's going to talk more about kale and how to plant it. We'll see you back in just a little bit on Garden Delights. Welcome back to Garden Delights. Today we're talking about kale, and we're going to be making kale with mushrooms. And we're going to talk more about the nutrition first, because I want you to put this on your list as a power vegetable, and that's kale. If you haven't had it in a long time, or you haven't had it at all, put it on your list. It is wonderful for you, and you hear a lot of people juicing it, making it in the morning, coming to work, and this is their energy drink that they're going to drink for the day, and I hope this is something you're going to include also. Kale can be, cooked, or it can be raw, and a lot of people, when they are juicing, it's going to be raw. And so we want to make sure that if you haven't planted in your garden, that once you hear all these good things, you're going to plant in your garden. Calorie-wise, a half a cup of cooked kale is about 30 calories, and if it's about a cup of raw kale, it's about 33 calories. It is also very good in the vitamins, vitamin A, C, and K. Not only that, but it is wonderful in fiber. And if you are not getting enough fiber in your diet, put some kale into your diet. It also, fiber reduces that blood sugar in our diet, but it also makes us feel really full, and that's what's important, because when we feel full, then we don't eat all that junk food. So keep that in mind when you're eating kale. It is also wonderful as far as our cancer nutrients, and so you want to make sure that you're incorporating that kale in there, because it also helps with our inflammatory nutrients. So those are two things that to me is very important in our nutrients. And also anything to me that strikes to me as something good that's going to prevent cancer for me, I'm going to try to put that in my diet. So those are all good things about our kale. They're also an excellent source of our potassium, our protein, and also calcium. So those are all good things that we should be thinking about in the nutrition part of kale. Now let's talk about the selection. When you're looking at your garden, if you're in the garden and you like to grow kale, this is the perfect time of year to grow kale, because it likes the cool weather. It's coming from the cabbage family, the turnip family, all those families like that like to grow better in the cool weather. But what you're looking for, you want to look for firm leaves. You want to look for things that are deep green. You don't want to buy any or pick any that have blemishes on it, dark circles, holes in it, because if they have holes in it, more than likely you have a pest that's been eating on those leaves. So you want to avoid those type leaves. So that's what you're looking for. Same way in the grocery store. If it's not in a bag, then you want to make sure you're looking at the leaves when you're buying it. But if it's in a bag, it's already probably been processed, and it's probably already chopped, because a lot of times when you buy it in the bag, it's going to be already chopped up. So when you're looking at the grocery store, think about that when you're selecting it. Now, storing it. If you're picking it out of a garden, you've got to store it correctly, because kale needs to be kept as long as you want it to be kept before you decide what you want to use for it. So normally, kale needs to be picked, and you do not wash it until you're getting ready to eat it. But once you pick your kale out of your garden, you need to put it in some kind of Ziploc bag, and that's going to keep it in your refrigerator for about 3 to 5 days. But when you buy it at the grocery store, if it's not in a bag, you want to put it in a bag once you get home from the grocery store. But don't wash it until you're ready to prepare it however you're going to prepare it. And sometimes you can buy kale already prepared, washed and everything in a bag. So either way, just look at that part of it. Look at your leaves, even if you're buying in the bag. Make sure you look at the expiration date. Make sure it looks fresh. You don't want any wilted looking kale, because that tells you it's gone too far, and it's not going to be good once you start cooking it either, or eating it in a salad, because you want a little crunch to it. So I hope you'll put kale into your diet. And when we come back, you're going to hear from Frank Hancock, and he's going to talk more about kale and how to plant it. So we'll see you back in just a little bit, and we'll be making the kale mushrooms.
Today we're going to talk about kale. Kale is a crop that's been around for a long time. Kale and collards and cabbage, they're in the same family. They're generally called cole crops, C-O-L-E. That comes from a Scandinavian name of K-O-H-L, which is a name just for leafy greens. They don't head like some of the modern day plants do. So kale is a crop that is the same as it's been for many, many years. The Romans ate kale. Kale is it's a cool season crop. You plant it, the soil can be from 50 degrees to 65, somewhere in that range. You want it to be as warm as you can get it in the springtime, 55 to 60, somewhere in that range. It is a biennial. It goes to seed every other year. So you can get a crop out of kale for a long period of time, but we generally grow it as an annual. So like I said, soil temperatures in the 50 and above range. You can plant it, depending on the season, you can plant it in mid-February through March in the springtime, or you'll plant it during the month of August, sometime in the fall. It gets a little sweeter as it gets a little bit of frost on it in the fall, so your fall crop is really a better crop than your spring crop is. But it's you know, it requires very little maintenance. The biggest thing you run into with the kale is insects. Insects like it. You get your cabbage worms and diamondback moth larvae. They'll put holes in the leaves. In fact, I've put some spinosad on this because I had a little bit of diamondback moth problems, and I also see where some cabbage worms have been eating some leaves. You're generally going to plant it from seed. You can get transplants, but usually in the home garden, it's fairly easy to grow, so we're going to plant it from seed. And you want it to be 8 to 12 inches apart. You don't want to plant it very deep, 1/4 to 1/2 inch. If you plant it too deep, it may not come up. It's one of those crops that if you try to place the seed every 12 inches apart in the row, that will just about ensure that none of it's going to come up. And if you sow it down the row, every single seed you drop will come up. So what you're looking at in this bed right here is some that I planted 6 weeks ago, and some of it didn't come up because we tried to space it out. So I planted it thicker, so when it comes up thick, then you got to thin it out so that you get about that 8 inches. We'll thin some of this out in a minute. When you harvest it, you're going to cut the greens. You want to cut the older leaves, the lower leaves. You don't want to go cutting the top out of it because that can affect the future yield, so we'll cut the lower leaves. And we'll just get down here for a minute and take a look at some of this. Let's take a look at what we've sown in the row here that is coming up really thick, and we'll try to go through here and take some of this out. Now, when I do this at home, I have a hard time because my wife doesn't want to take any of it out, so I wind up with this really thick row of kale, but we'll bring it down here to where we've got to give it enough room to grow. You can see it gets fairly large when it starts growing, so if you start off with it all really close together, it's not gonna do as well. So we'll separate it here, and I'll come back and look at it a little closer once I get it to recover from thinning it out. So we'll just keep on right on down our row, however long it is. And this is, in the home garden, probably the best way to plant it is to just sow it down the row. When it comes up, you can start thinning it out a little bit. Some of this was left over from when I tried to plant it before, but we won't try to perfect that, but you get the general idea that I got to leave a little bit of room here for these plants to grow. So that is probably the most common way to plant it. If you got a small spot and you want to get some transplants, that's fine too. We'll take these oldest leaves off of it when we start harvesting it. Kale gets really curly as it gets older. This kale is really young that we're cutting here. This is really gonna be good. There's just a little bug on it right there. But we'll take these older leaves, and Susan will tell you more about preparing it, but it is a crop that requires a good bit of washing, because these curled up leaves are fairly hard, and we don't want to, like I said earlier, we don't want to get up here and take off our top growing leaves. So we're going to stay down below here and get them off. Fairly easy crop to grow. You got to watch your insects, because the insects, I'm going to move over here a little bit where I can reach a little bit more of this. Susan will be fixing this for us after a while, so I'll get as much off of here as I can that's young and tender. Some people love kale. It's very nutritious. Some people don't like it so well. I like my kale boiled, and then we can put a little bit of hot sauce, a little vinegar on it, and just eat it. If you let it get really big and tough, then you need to cut the stems out. Like we'll cut the stem out of that, because that's going to be a little bit tough right there. But you can have lots of fun in the kale, and it grows really nice. It's easy to grow. Watch out for the worms. There's one right there that's had something working on it a little bit. I don't see him now. Like I say, as soon as I saw that, I put some spinosad out here to try to control that, because one thing I don't like to do is share my kale with worms. Now, if you remember last time, we mixed up our soil. This is that pot of soil we made up, and I put just a few kale seed in it. I'll thin these out a little bit as they go along. You can see some of these leaves here where the worms, it had some diamondback moth larvae on there, and they were putting holes in the leaves, so they had to go. We couldn't keep them around. Kale seed, when you're seeding it, it's very small. There's like 144,000 seed in a pound. So when you go buy kale for your garden, you don't need but just a little teaspoonful to plant all the kale you ever wanted to plant. That you can see here, it's a very tiny seed. That's about all there is to growing kale. You got to get it to come up. It needs a little water, about 1.5 inches a week. Needs some fertilizer or some good organic soil mix. And we're gonna go inside and see what Susan is fixing for us.
Today we're talking about kale, and we're going to be making kale with mushrooms. When I start chopping up my kale, I want to make sure it's fine enough so when people are eating it, it doesn't, string out, and it's a smaller size. So what I usually do is, and this kale has been washed, is I'll take a couple leaves and I may just wrap, 3 to 4 leaves around. And what I'm going to do is just show you what I do to normally just chop it up. So I'll just chop one way the leaves, and then I'm going to turn it another way to kind of get them to where that I chop it the opposite way I just chopped it. And what I'm trying to do is just make sure that the kale gets chopped up enough to where it's going to be easy to eat. Now they do say that the longer you leave kale alone, like for 5 minutes, it even produces more of the nutrients, and it's even healthier for you if you can leave it for about 5 minutes. This is what research says. So I'm just going to add this to the bunch of kale that I already have chopped up. For the recipe, you need about 10 ounces of kale, and if you have more than that, that's okay. You just need to add more of the juice to kind of keep it going. So this is about 10 ounces of kale. And so we're going to add this last to the recipe, but first what we need to do is we're going to start up our little pot that's going to heat up, and it's going to make a little bit of a noise that you may not be used to, but it's the fan working. And what I'm going to do is heat up about a tablespoon of olive oil. And this thing is wonderful. It doesn't take long at all for it to heat up. So I'm going to go ahead and pour the oil into the pan. And you can see it's not a whole lot of oil. But what we're going to do is we're going to stir fry our onions. And this is a half a cup of onions. And so you'll want to go ahead and put them in, and you'll hear it sizzling pretty quick. And what we're going to try to do with our onions is we're going to try to caramelize those onions. And once they're caramelized, we're going to add some other ingredients to it, but we want to get that part done first. So I'm going to get this, speed it up just a little bit, get that oil heated up, and we're going to have some caramelized onions before you know it. And I'll kind of go over the recipe just to tell you a little bit more about what we're going to put in with the onions. We want to caramelize it. And then we're going to stop the caramelizing of the onions by adding a little bit of cooking wine, white wine to it, and that's going to stop it. And then we want to add our garlic, and we're going to add our mushrooms. We don't want to cook our garlic too long, because if you cook it too long, it gets to where it's really strong. So we're going to put it in after the onions stir fry a little bit to get them caramelized. So we're going to do that now, and you can see that I barely put a little oil into the pan, because that's really all you need, just a little bit to kind of get around your onions, just for them to cook. So we're going to continue working with our onions. Kale is just such a versatile vegetable, because I'm cooking today with it as far as in a skillet. But there's so many things you can do with it. You could even add it to a soup. If you enjoy soup in the wintertime, you could freeze it, bring it back out, and use it for other things too as far as soups. You could, if you're used to putting other green things in your soup, think about kale, putting it into your soup. And like I said, this time of year is when you're going to see a lot of it. So you want to make sure that you buy it, because when it is in season, the price is going to be better, and you can store up on it. And the thing about kale, it's from that turnip green and the collard green and the cabbage family. So when you cook it, it's automatically going to cook down. So whatever you think you're going to have, it's going to cook down. So if you're doing it for a family, and this recipe is for 4 people, so if you're doing it more for 6 people, you're going to need to probably adjust the recipe to make it fit your needs. They're still cooking, and I'm just waiting for them to get a little brown, so they're caramelized a little bit, and that shouldn't take much longer. And then we're going to add that 1 teaspoon of minced garlic, and then we're going to add a cup of chopped mushrooms to this onion mixture. And this is a cup of chopped mushrooms. These We're easy to, you can buy whole ones, you can buy pre-sliced ones, but I don't think I've ever seen in a grocery store where you get mushrooms already chopped up. But if you do, and you're trying to save time, then you may want to get them. And I know you can't see this, but I can tell you they are starting to turn brown, so they're looking really good. And I don't want to go too far, but I just want to get them a little caramelized. It does help with the taste of the kale. It just kind of soaks into the flavor of the kale when you start cooking everything. So that's about what I'm looking for. They're caramelized good. They got that brown texture to it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cut the heat down just a little bit, and I'm going to stop the caramelizing part by adding a little bit of white wine, cooking wine. So I'm going to add that to it, and we're just going to stop it just for a little bit. And you can hear it sizzling, and let me tell you, it smells really, really good. So we added that, and now I'm going to go ahead and add the mushrooms, because I want them to cook just a little bit also before we add the kale to it. I'm going to also add the garlic. And if you know, like I always say, I'm a fan of garlic. So if I can put garlic into a recipe, I'm going to do it. So as you can see, that slowed everything down by putting the wine into it, the cooking wine. So all I'm going to do is kind of stir it around just to make sure it kind of gets going and get all those mushrooms and the garlic incorporated into that onion mixture. Oh, and it smells so good. And I love onions cooking. You know, when you go to a fair or festival, if you smell onions cooking, it always kind of draws you to that area. So this is looking really good. So now that I'm going to have this done, I'm going to start adding my kale. First, I'm going to put this top on this wine because I need to save it for another time. So we're going to start adding the kale to this mixture. And as you can see, it's really fluffed up into this bowl I have. But I will tell you through the recipe and the cooking method that we're going to do with this, it's going to cook down. And you can see I can keep putting more of this kale in there, and I'm just going to keep patting it down because I want it all in there. It's amazing how fast it's going to cook down. I think I'm going to stop there, see if I can do a little bit of stirring, because I really want, my whole thing is I want to get some of that onion mixture moved into the kale, so that's what I'm going to try to do. And it smells so good. And I love the way vegetables, when they get heated up, that bright green color, that's what we're looking for. And it won't take long before this kale is going to be ready. Now, the recipe is going to tell you to put some kind of chicken stock. You can make your own homemade chicken stock, or you can buy store-bought. If you're trying to keep your sodium down, you want to make sure that you're looking for low sodium chicken stock. And just notice, I put all this in here, and just notice just this heat, and I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of this, how fast it's already kind of going down into the pan. And I can even stir it, and I can see that bright green color. So I'm trying to get some of that mushrooms, onions, garlic into it, and it smells so good. I know you're going to like this recipe. It's so easy, and it just tastes really good. So that's about what I want as far as the stirring up part. I've got some of the onion, the garlic, and the mushrooms kind of mixed in with the kale. So what I want to do now is I'm going to cut this down just a little bit to make it where it's going to simmer. So we don't want it up really high. So what you do next is you're going to add some chicken stock to it. And what I want to do, and the recipe is going to tell you this, to add chicken stock to about 3/4 full before you don't want to go over the kale, but 3/4 into the kale, because this is going to help it. This makes it taste good, but it also is going to get it to where it will steam upright while it's cooking. So this is about what you want. And it's amazing how fast this is already cooked down. So I'm just going to stir it just a little bit more, and you can see it's almost there. So what you're going to do is you're going to need to cover this, and I'm going to get a lid real quick, and you're going to cover this And you're going to let this cook on simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes. And the kale's going to be so good, and it's ready. And the last thing we're going to do before we serve it with Frank, we're going to add just a little bit, because I love cheese and I love different types of cheese. This is a little bit of cheese. It's a shaved Parmesan cheese, and we're going to add that after it's cooked, just the top of it, to get just a little bit more flavor to it. So when we come back, we're going to be trying that kale with mushroom. So we'll see you back in just a little bit. We have Frank with us, and Frank, you did a wonderful job picking this kale for me.
We worked in the kale, and it looked pretty good.
It looks good, and it's going to taste good too.
I'm ready.
I'm going to spoon you some up. I'm going to grab your bowl from you and spoon you some up. And I also have a little, make sure it's not too hot for you. It's amazing how you can just load it up in your container. And then, all right, hold on now. You have to let me get you a little cheese on it. I love some cheese. Oh, I gave you a lot.
All right.
That's okay. You
A
can
lot
mix
of
it in
cheese
there.
is okay too.
That's
I mean,
all right.
A little cheese, a lot of cheese.
This looks so good. Let me know if it's too hot. If it is, don't eat too big.
Just right.
Is it just right? Ooh, I got a lot too. That's okay because I love cheese anyway.
And it's good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Well, I think the cheese too can
Well,
just
no,
add.
it would be. You know, I picked it myself.
I know it, and I appreciate it too because I was thinking, how better can it be that you have a recipe you want to do and you have somebody that can go pick the kale for you?
Growing right out behind the office.
Yes, and it looked really good
It's
too.
been around a long time. You know, it's been the Romans, 2,000 years BC. Still
That
had
is really
kale.
good.
I've been wondering if this is the reason that dinosaurs were so big.
It could have been.
Eating
They
kale.
knew the power of kale. Mm-hmm. Well, this is really, really good. And I just want you to put this on your list as a power vegetable, whether it's raw or cooked. Put it on your list for next week to go by. And I hope that you will think about this on your list. If you haven't, put it on that grocery list because it's really, really good. The next time we see you on Garden Lights, never know what you're going to see, but this recipe will be on your website. And I hope you will write it down because you are going to like it. We'll see you back on Garden Delights.
I bet if Popeye had known about this, he'd have been bigger.